All in favor? Our one and only, actually first off, the approval of the minutes of the April 5th, 2016 hearing. Everybody had a chance to read the minutes and see if anybody have any questions about them.
I can't hear.
Approval of the minutes, asking the board if they've got any questions or comments or had a chance to read the April 5th, 2016 minutes.
I make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Well, all in favor?
Excuse me, the microphones don't seem to be working.
I don't play with them enough to know how to operate them, honestly.
Yeah, talk
You know
straight
how.
into them.
It is.
Talk straight into
Does
them.
this thing have to be
Does
on?
that work any better?
Can you hear us now?
Because I just turned it on.
Can you hear me now?
Maybe each one.
They're not on.
Okay.
Why don't you just talk loudly,
Okay.
How about we try that?
okay?
Okay. The one and only item for tonight's the Sycamore Crossing, we had postponed it from the April 5th, 2016 meeting. And I'm going to go into that again tonight. So, anybody like to speak on?
Good evening. Thank you for hearing from me tonight. My name is Frank Moore. I'm an attorney and I'm here representing Sycamore Crossing LLC, which is owned by Dr. Whaley and Mrs. Whaley, Jane Whaley. And we are here before the board asking for a variance on the 15-foot rear yard setback at 531 East Main Street. Now, at the last meeting, which I've heard the tape recording on, there was an inclination to grant if the adjacent property owner approved. He was worried about a cloud on his title for if in fact the variance was granted. We were given the opportunity to talk to him. He did say at the last meeting that he didn't want to hold up anybody and he didn't want to cause any problems. In the meantime, what we've done is we've gone out there and we've tried to give you some information that will help you understand why we believe that a variance is appropriate. I've handed out the materials to you ahead of time, and if we could just go through those very quickly. The very top exhibit number 1, is the tax plat showing the relevant properties. And in particular, we've got the Sycamore Whaley property in the middle. We've got Mr. Farmer's property on the left, and then we have, I'm on the first page right here. Okay? So we have the Sycamore Whaley property, the Farmer property that's adjacent, the Locklear property, and then of course Eaton and Clack. Those are the relevant properties. Now if you turn to the next page, Exhibit 2, what we've done is this is an aerial photograph of the same area showing what the buffer area is and also showing the relative positions of both the Sycamore Whaley property and the Farmer property. And what we've done there is we've established a approximate property line. I say approximate, it's not accurate to the nth degree, but it gives you an idea and a flavor of what the relationship is of these various buildings to each other. On Exhibit 3, we've got another view which is giving you an opportunity to look at the area in which we're looking for a variance. And you'll see if you kind of curl it back a little bit, you'll see that Mr. Farmer's property is up there at the top, and that's the property that's immediately adjacent to the area of the variance. That's Exhibit 3. Exhibit 4, of course, is the front of Sycamore Crossing, a new addition to downtown Blue Ridge, which of course has cost a lot of money and I believe means a lot to the city of Blue Ridge and will mean a lot to the city of Blue Ridge, and quite frankly will probably increase all the property values in the area. The next photograph, Exhibit 5, is a picture of the area and the portion of the building that we're asking for a variance on. And as you can see, that would be Exhibit 5, yes ma'am. As you can see, it's comprised mostly of decking, and there's apparently a small portion of that building area that's also in the variance requested. Now, Exhibit 6 is important because what that shows is the relative height and distance from the adjacent property, Mr. Farmer's property, and Sycamore Crossings property. That drop-off goes from 18 feet down to 0 in that area. This is not an area that's going to be used. This is not an area that has any useful purpose. And so we believe that's a very relevant and peculiar topographical aspect of this property. Exhibit number 7 is a copy or a picture of Mr. Farmer's, one of his buildings on his property. And I might point out to you, if you look carefully, you'll see to the left of that, you'll see some cones. And then in front of the cones, you'll see a rail fence, not fence, but actually in the ground beams. And you can see how close that property is to the property line. And if you want to go back and look at exhibit number 1,
Is that the property line where it looked like railroad ties are?
yeah, the railroad tie right there by the back is where it is. And if you go back to exhibit number 1, you can see that he is bordering the Locklear property, 521 East Main. And so his property line actually comes back about 15 to 20 feet from the Sycamore Whaley property. So here, Mr. Farmer has got a building that is not in conformity with the variances requirement or the setback requirement that's set forth in the statute.
Excuse me, sir, do you know that if there was a variance requested on that property when it was built? Because I have no knowledge of that.
Yes, ma'am. I have done some research, and my research indicates that there have been 15 variances that have been sought,
No, sir, on this particular building.
and none of them include this particular building. And only 2 were denied, by the way.
And we know when that building was constructed?
Right.
Yes, actually, I do know because I happen to know the person who supplied the materials for it, and that was in 2002.
So that was prior to anybody's participation on this board?
Right.
Well, I don't
I
know.
mean, it
when-
is, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I don't know when.
We're also not an enforcement board. We're not here to look at other properties and decide what should have been done or needs to be done or what needs to be changed on other properties.
I see.
Yeah, our position here is basically to look at, do we issue variances and do we not? And any that are out there that are outside of our control is not up to this board as far
I
as fixing
understand.
any issues.
I understand, and perhaps I'm a little bit confused because I know there was a great deal of time spent at last meeting talking to Mr. Farmer, and apparently his objections were being considered rather mightily by the panel. And so I thought that it would be relevant to let the panel know that Mr. Farmer is in a very similar situation, and he too will be coming before the board.
That situation doesn't have anything to do with this situation. We're looking at particularly these 2 properties.
Oh, okay, sir. That's good. I appreciate that.
We have no ability to go back and make him move that, change that, do anything like that. That's outside the scope of this board.
Okay, and forgive me if I didn't understand. I did listen to the tape recording, and based on that, I prepared for today. And so I thought that Mr. Farmer's input was relatively important to the decision based on what I heard, but I may be wrong. So I
It is
understand.
important, but this is strictly on these 2 pieces of property.
Yes,
And we
sir.
requested Ms. Whaley we gave the additional month to try to resolve the issue, if I remember correctly. And I have not heard yet from her as to whether or not she's resolved the issue with Mr. Farmer.
Right. Now, the purpose of a variance, according to the Georgia Supreme Court, is to allow the owner to make a reasonable use of his or her property. In that regard, the central business district regulations that actually comprise part of the ordinances that are the regulations here say that this district is designed and intended as a specialized district directed to serve the pedestrian in a compact central area of the city. The central business district will provide for a high-density shopping and business environment, especially stressing the pedestrian function and interaction of people and businesses, rather than being heavily oriented toward the use of automobiles. With that in mind, one has to ask, what is the purpose of what it's actually called a rear yard setback? And from best I can tell, there doesn't appear to be anything that would be substantially related to health, safety, morality, or welfare, which of course is the litmus test for a proper setback or a proper zoning ordinance. So what we're looking at here is we've got a small encroachment, if you will, on the rear yard. It does not interfere with the supply of light and air. It does not cause any congestion in public streets, and these are the items that are of particular note when you're looking at a variance. There is no increased danger of fire. It will not imperil the public safety, and it will not unreasonably diminish established property values. To the contrary, as I said earlier, I believe that this entire Sycamore Crossing has probably boosted the values of property in the area. So in conclusion then, we would ask and respectfully ask that you grant a variance of 9.5 feet, leaving a setback at 5.5 feet, and that be granted and provided to the Sycamore Crossing property. And I thank you for your time. Yes, sir.
I have a real concern about the matter of a precedent being set. In other words, you're asking us to approve a variance for an activity which your client proceeded with without proper clearance. That would be remarkable that we would allow something like that. It would set a precedent all up and down Main Street in the Central Business District in general. When I talked with Mrs. Whaley on April the 4th, the day before the last meeting, she assured me that Mr. Farmer had no objections. And I said, fine.
I did not say that. I
Yes,
did
you
not
did.
assure you that he had no objections. You said, would you please call Mr. Farmer? I hadn't even talked with Mr. Farmer.
I asked you, I said if you could bring a letter or have Mr. Farmer attend
And I
the
called
meeting.
Mr. Farmer, but
And
I
you
never said he.
and your words were, you said there should be no problem, and I don't think there'll be any problems at all getting a letter or having Mr. Farmer attend the meeting.
Well, I hadn't talked to Mr. Farmer at the time. I
Then how
didn't.
could you tell us that?
You
Well,
gave
gonna
us
be a
an impression
problem.
that you had talked with Mr.
No,
Farmer.
sir, I did not.
And you did not
Yes.
stammer. You assured
No, sir,
that
I
Mr.
did
Farmer
not.
was a nice man and that he had no objections.
No, I never said he had no objections. I had never spoken with him one
Well, now we
time.
hear that.
Well,
You-
is it your
I
word
don't-
against mine?
Okay, I don't think this is relevant.
Excuse me.
I don't think.
Yeah, I mean,
think this
if we're going to
matters.
talk about Mr. Farmer, then that was the conversation
not
I was
here.
trying to have about his property back there
That is not
encroaching even
true.
more than ours.
And I prefer to ask Ms. Whaley, have you resolved this issue with Mr. Farmer?
No, we haven't. Everyone in the world's been trying to work with this, and the only thing he says it's a cloud on his land, and that's not the case. Miss Eaton and Mr. Eaton, their property's been greatly enhanced. I don't understand. There've been so many variants. The reason you ask for a variance is because you need a change.
As a matter of course, since this board's been in place, I can't speak about other boards. If there are objections to a variance request, the variance is generally denied because this is an adjacent owner. And if the ones that have not been denied, there has been permission from the adjacent owners.
Well,
It's not in the writing.
Can I address that? Because I've looked at the ordinance, and nowhere in the ordinance does it say one single thing about the adjacent property owner.
I understand that,
That
but
it's
that's
supposed to
been
be,
our common
in fact, that
practice.
it's supposed to be made, the decision is supposed to be made based on the criteria that I have described to you, and that was whether or not it would impede the supply of light and air, whether or not it would cause congestion in the public streets, whether it would increase the danger of fire, whether it would imperil the public safety, and whether it would unreasonably diminish established property values. And then there's another catch-all, whether it would impair the health, safety, comfort, morals, or general welfare of the inhabitants of the city. This yard, this backyard or rear yard as it's called, it's not even called a setback in the statute and in the ordinance. This rear yard does none of those things. It does not accomplish any of those things. But the one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't include the adjacent neighbor. And so it kind of makes it relevant again, what I was saying before, when we look at Mr. Farmer's property and it's literally within inches of the property line. And yet here we are, we're back to talking about whether or not Mr. Farmer has approved it. I mean, to me, it's an abdication of the responsibility of the board to.
It's not
I
a
don't even know the board
responsibility
even
to
existed.
enforce
Michael, I'd like to say something.
issue.
I think it is relevant. I think you're talking about a man who I don't see here tonight, and I don't know if he still objects to it. Okay, I've been on the board for quite some time, and it's not written, but our common practice has been, if somebody objects, we do it. It doesn't mean that's the only thing we do. I look at this, and I look at Farmer's building there, and it looks like a foot from the property line. If I was Mel Locklear, you know, I'd go after him. If Mel had the same attitude that Mr. Farmer has, then by God, he should go after him and make him cut
And
the
that's
building
the
off.
difference.
And that is a different thing, but it makes, to me, it is relative.
And
It's
that's
the
his
same man.
prerogative to do that.
It's the same man. I know we're not responsible for that, but I look at this and I go, how can, or why is he even objecting to it? And I don't even know if he still is objecting to it. Is
Have
he?
you seen the note?
No, I have not.
No, it hasn't,
No,
hasn't
I
been
haven't
passed
seen
yet.
it, no.
Hasn't been passed this way yet. Sorry.
Well, why don't you read it?
It was
If
dated
it's
on,
something-
it was dated on April 8th, I think it is, after our meeting on
It was
the,
dated at April 8, 2016.
On the fifth.
It was written to Mr. Michael Eaton and Blue Ridge Zoning Board. My answer is no on the 7-foot encroachment on my property, which would put a cloud on the title. From now on, please fill up hole on my fill dirt embankment and get the 7-foot encroachment on the 15-foot setback. Danny Farmer.
But it is not an encroachment on his property.
By the way, I've
It's
been a
a-
lawyer,
it's a-
I've been a lawyer. Go
It's
ahead.
not an encroachment on his property. That's what he's wrong about. It's an encroachment into the easement or the separation line. It's not on
Yeah.
his property, it's 6 feet from the
I
property.
understand that for sure.
I just,
Yeah, I mean,
I'm,
what I'm-
I find it hard to believe that a guy can sit there and look at this when he owns a building that's clearly encroaching, and I know it's not our responsibility.
May I ask
say
a
that?
question? Is it okay for me to ask a question? Is it a public meeting for me to ask a question?
Absolutely.
I think you just said that that note was dated April the 8th. And that you said that you gave 30 days to work out with Mr. Farmer the issue. April the 8th is a month ago.
we met on the 5th.
Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to point out that as of the 8th, there wasn't any working with Mr. Farmer. It was over and done with. Second, Congress comes in and Congress goes out. Zoning boards get replaced. I do not believe, and I'm not making any statement about it, that you can abdicate to some prior board and what they did and what you didn't do. I mean, it's zoning we ought to live with. Thirdly, I'm really sort of personally hurt by what's going on here. 22 years ago, I came up here and started a clinic at Fannin Regional Hospital because poor people wouldn't drive to Atlanta for cancer care. That became a full-time, 2-day-a-week clinic, and the Mayor of McKaysville, the commissioner, the head of the county commission, asked me, could see the value it was providing the community, and asked me, would I open an office here? To the medical community and to the political community, I said, when I can afford the infrastructure for an office, I'll open one here. It's been 15 years ago. You have a large cancer center here that's part of the 5th biggest cancer network in the United States. You've got a branch in Blairsville, you've got a branch in Jasper. I don't think we've worked in any way against the community or done anything in a selfish fashion. It hasn't been a year since I donated $200,000, or we donated $200,000 worth of property to your city to build a walking trail that I could have built apartments on. And you, as the zoning board, knew I could have had apartments built on there, and I could have sold the land. I gave $200,000 of it to you. You zoned it so they could have a park, and it's sitting there. I am convinced.
Well, we aren't the zoning board, just so you
No,
know.
I know that. You know what I'm saying. Look, I don't know anything about politics. What I'm saying is that I can see from the pictures nobody's ox is getting gored here. This man looks over our property. there's a 15, 18-foot drop-off. I can't see where there's any harm to anybody. Lastly, that whole walkway back there is a rat's nest garbage dump where people throw cigarettes and throw beer
From
cans.
his property.
His property and everything. We've cleaned up ours, and if we're assuming
Cleaned
we're
up
gonna
his
be
too.
there, we're gonna clean it up more, you know, put some flowers on that bank. I mean, I see nothing here except good. I really don't see that anybody's ox is being bored.
Okay, I have a question. The part that's sticking out there, how big is that?
What
That
exhibit?
little,
please?
Little
the
extension
little
on the porch.
extension.
Exhibit 5.
Exhibit 5.
Here's the building.
That's just a porch.
Tim, how far is that?
The porch from, it's about
The
5
little
feet past the,
So if that was gone, you'd be asking for how big of a variance?
taking that would be 5, I couldn't tell you, 4.5, I don't have the measurements. They actually had it, the surveyor punched the stick, so it's a lot more accurate than the last time I came in.
I also have a question. It looks like, was that air conditioning unit?
That's a
added?
that's a
Is
transformer.
that transformer?
It's an electric transformer.
Was that added after?
No, that was already there.
That was, okay. Just
It was
wondered.
there when I was there, and I met Miss Whaley.
Oh, I've seen it there.
It was
I've been
there.
there too. I didn't know if it was new, basically,
She thought it was new.
to service the building. I didn't know.
Well, back to my point, I don't know how we can ignore, you know, if Danny Farmer, that's dated April 8th and he's not here. We don't have to deny an approval like that when it's you gotta look at the hardship on their end too. That's my opinion. You know, you know, we're a board of appeals, but I mean, I look at the expense it would cost them to tear that down. And are we willing to do that? Then again, if the board does turn it down, you can always go to the city council. I mean, we're not the final
We're not the
say.
final
Well,
say.
one of the things I've got a question on is what exactly is the purpose of the rear yard, the 15-foot rear yard? Now, that's very important because if it's not substantially related to the things that I mentioned to you, which is health, safety,
Sorry,
morality.
we heard you. We did hear you both times.
Yeah. So if it's not substantially related to that, then an infringement on a person's property is unconstitutional. So the ordinance itself, and what I haven't heard is I haven't heard anybody here say what it is, what negative effect that this is having on any adjacent property. We're talking about Danny Farmer, which is supposedly wholly irrelevant under the statute, under the ordinance. What Mr. Farmer does or does not do should be irrelevant, whether he agrees or doesn't agree. Essentially what you're doing is you're empowering this man to make a decision that 5 of you have been elected or appointed to make.
It
So,
seems to me, Mr. Moore, that you might ought to be representing Ms. Whaley with regard to her builder of 25 years' experience, not knowing what the buffer area was according to the ordinance. The way you're talking is we may just as well pitch this out, we, the board, could pitch this on out into the trash. That we're not going to abide by ordinances in place and by neighbors of property adjacent having objections.
where does it say that in the ordinance? Where does it say that a neighbor gets to veto
No,
any
he's
any
talking about the
variance?
15-foot setback. This
I mean,
building, when we asked why this building encroached on the 15-foot setback, we were told from both Ms. Whaley and Mr. Weed that nobody checked. We assumed because there was a 0 lot line side and front setback, there would be a 0 line rear setback.
I think
Well,
that's what the
assume is a
builder
very
said.
interesting word.
And furthermore, whenever the project proceeded, it continued on a so-called footprint that was expanded over the original permit.
Didn't show that there was gonna be anything else built around it.
And then Mr. Farmer states that he spoke to the carpenter, said, "You're going too far, and I'm going to see an attorney about this." To tell Ms. Whaley that I'm going to see an attorney about it.
Yeah, and I think he said that you're over the line, which I think would have been assuming that it was a property line. Because as Mr. Farmer said at the last meeting, he said he didn't know anything about setbacks. He'd never dealt with a setback before. or a variance.
You know, I gotta bring something else up. And I think we've had this conversation before. We're a zoning board of appeals. That means we appeal things. That doesn't mean we go strictly by the ordinance. I mean, if you only went by the ordinance and all the zoning and everything, this board wouldn't exist. There's no reason for this board. And you brought that up before, and that's a disagreement I have with you. We are a zoning board of appeals. They come to us for an appeal. And it's not throwing away that whole zoning book. That's our job. And I don't get why,
But we're listening to appeals, we don't make appeals.
That's right.
We grant appeals.
We grant appeals, but
We
we
grant
don't, we
appeals.
don't change the zoning.
So you're saying every time we grant an appeal, we're throwing the book away.
Well,
And we're not doing that. That's
And that's all
the
that I was
purpose of
asking.
this board. So,
but in the past, when we have agreed, it has been because there's been no objections.
well, yeah, I mean, that's just been, but it's not
Well,
written that way. We have to listen to what he
It's my
says.
sad duty to make a motion that we deny this appeal for a variance. I make that motion.
I'll second it.
Before you vote on it, can I make one last point? I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I know what a cloud on title is. Mr. Farmer does not have a cloud on his title if we're granting the variance. Absolutely not.
Why was he not,
We gave this
Consult.
money 30 days to resolve this.
Right, he was supposed to
At
go
her
see a
request.
lawyer, but he
Her
told me
consent.
he wasn't gonna go
And
see
I
a
wanted
lawyer.
to point one other thing, that I'd be quiet. I've been building buildings in the CBD district. I've built 4 now. And I did not know that there was a setback. So that's not a common thing. Central Business District, to me, had 0 lot lines. And then when I discussed this with Roy, he said, unless there's a piece of property behind it. I never knew that. So, and I've been a builder for 40 years. So builders can make mistakes. I'm sure you've made mistakes. And I don't think you should punish someone when you have, well,
that's
it.
colored
But you should
word.
get permission before you start something, shouldn't
We've
you?
got-
That's a whole nother issue. That has to do with getting a permit.
We've got a motion and a second on the table. All in favor? All opposed?
Thank you for your time.
So,
Yes, sir.
Make a motion,